So it's great to be at Black Hat again. Well, now let's start with a joke. I hope you like it. So you have a network guy with a PhD in graph theory, a jarhead with experience in human intelligence with deployments overseas, and then a mathematician and machine learning wizard. They come into a room, and what you get is like a 5 p.m. talk. I hope it will not bore you to death. But then hopefully what you'll get is like some useful insights and then trigger some useful conversations. So what are we trying to do in this talk? In fact, cybercrime is a real problem. It's basically a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's put in a lot of impact on individuals, organizations, and governments alike. And it's been thriving for over a decade. Now, what we've been doing as an industry is being reactive. Most of what we do is find IOCs, push them into some enforcement product, but then what we're proposing with this talk is that we want to have this proactive, unifying approach where you combine the actor-centric intelligence or human intelligence that is coming from the ground, where you have experts dealing with the cyber criminals on their own turf, and then you combine that with a global perspective into the network and the IP space, and you take those two with signals or seeds as IPs and domains, and now you try to amplify all of those seeds into much more intelligence that is useful for your decision making. That's the recommendation engine we're proposing here, and we're going to go into details. Now let's start with an immersive experience. What you see here is a crimeware forum, procard.cc, and when you think about it, there are two things at least happening in the back end. One of them, how is this forum, as well as thousands of similar ones, exist on the internet? There's something happening that makes them available, successful, and thriving. And that's the enabling technology of bulletproof hosting providers. That's the first part we're going to cover. And then on the other side, you'll have a consumer experience, because all of these sites, they need people to go there to engage in some business or conversations or some activity. And that's the recommendation system we're going to discuss.
So I'm not going to bore you with another marketplace overview or the deep dark web and stuff like that, but and we don't have time for that anyway. The two things that you want to take away from this slide, though, from an actor-centric view, from a human intelligence type view, it's about having access to the actors. And when I say actors, I don't mean, notional groups linked with IOCs and TTPs. I mean actual humans. So the marketplace, which is a living, breathing, very organized space, gives us that medium. And that's what my team does. We target the actors. We go in, we get the placement of access, and then we do targeting of the actors directly. And that's humans. The cybercrime marketplace also, there's goods, products, services, but you have this lower base, right, a fundamental kind of core enabling services at the very bottom. And bulletproof hosting is probably the biggest enabling service that you'll find in the underground. If there's any one group, operation, or actor that touches more top-tier cyber criminals, it's the bulletproof hosters. And the whole goal is to target the enabling service, that core service, so you can start to look at how you disrupt it, okay? Not just react, it's understand the business process, and then how do you disrupt that? So over about the last 2 years, we've been, from an actor perspective, targeting the actual guys behind the bulletproof hosting. We've mapped out about 10 to 15 true BPH services in the underground. We think that's pretty much what's available right now. As far as the countries where they're located, we're seeing 3 main countries: Moldova, Russia, and Ukraine. Some of the things that they're doing is leveraging what we call gray areas. So, you have Ukraine, for example. There's a situation in the east part of Ukraine. You've got, Donetsk and Lugansk, which is both rebel-controlled areas. So that they're putting their physical infrastructure there as well, because it's totally off limits, not just to Western law enforcement, but also to Ukrainian law enforcement. You look at Moldova. You've got the Moldovan operations putting infrastructure in Transnistria. That's like a kind of self-proclaimed republic that nobody really recognizes outside of maybe other self-proclaimed republics. They're putting there. That's also off limits to Western law enforcement. And then the last thing there is corruption. So we monitor the underground. We are embedded in this. We know it intimately. We've mapped out the space for the bulletproof hosters and all the other various services. And what we see is there's raids that happen. You'll see like the guy here, So Sweet, was raided in December, right before Avalanche was taken down. We know that he was tipped off because of corruption. 24 hours later, the guy was back in service and had his stuff back up. And what's really cool about the marketplace, you see like all that chaos. He's doing damage control because it's a business. The other Bulletproof hosters are like sharks in the water. They've got like monthly specials and they're trying to take market share and stuff like that. But he's back in business 24 hours later. And then you've got Abdullah, W-Host. This guy's been around since mid-2000. I know he's been raided 3 times. Law enforcement knows who he is, knows where his actual data centers are, and he's still operating right now. You can go in the underground and get hosting from him if you want. So it's really hard to gauge the impact of a core enabler like this if you don't have the actor view, if you don't have that upstream view. And as you can see, this is like the what's what of malware. Over a 90-day period, we were looking at, we'll call him Alex. That's, we don't think it's his real name, but we'll just call him Alex. This is all the stuff that he was associated with just on a 90-day period. So Cerber, Locky, Osiris, Dridex, Handsitter, Panda Banker, phishing for everything. One of the interesting things is that this is a sophisticated kind of top tier Bulletproof hoster, and just by extension, any of the actors that can afford his services are somewhat more sophisticated than, say, the bottom feeders that make up the majority of the actors in the underground. So who is this guy Alex? Real fast, top tier Bulletproof hosting provider. He's Russian based. He has links to China though. We think he resided in China for about 4 years. He's been active in the underground for since 2006, where he was doing low level stuff. 2009, he really started getting into Bulletproof hosting. Like I said, it's a business for him. Think of him as the CEO. They have a whole slew of services, server setup and admin, domain registration. They have a /24 in Russia that is the back end that they'll provide for VPSs and VDSs. The most popular service that he's got, the service offering, right? Think alternate streams of revenue is his host-based fast flux network, and it's a proxy network that consists of cloud instances. He's abusing all the major cloud service providers. I think we counted about 230 on that 90-day period. Hits AWS really hard, was hitting Google Cloud and Alibaba and tons of other ones. That's one of his most popular services. So again, it's all about understanding the business model on the actor side, because we want to know those pain points. We want to know how can we, if I poke him here, what will happen? How can we disrupt it? So how do you set this up? He has a local storefront that is semi-static. He has front companies that he associates with that storefront. We think the storefront is more for local, for like tax purposes and, to have a local entity. But he's registering his own net blocks. He's establishing peering relationships. He needs to maintain connectivity to the internet. And then what he does is, this is back in 2009. He establishes his presence in the underground market, and through just solid support and stable services, he's constantly building his reputation and to what it is now as a top Bulletproof hosting provider.
So now, how about Alex's network infrastructure? In fact, as we said, he makes sure to establish ASNs and get IP space. What you see here is, I would say, a graph representing his core infrastructure that is dedicated, not the ones that he's abusing from cloud services. So you see the gray ASNs, Medialand, Energomontage, Ferasco. Those have been registered between 2011 and 2016. One of them is defunct at the moment. But then they're not related via peering relationships. In fact, they're related via the Alexander Volosovic handle, which happens to appear in the registration information of the ASNs. More interestingly, you see the Alfred Brewster handle that links Ferasco with Checktor, a Dutch ASN. In fact, Checktor is not part of Alex's infrastructure. It's just a handle that a lot of companies have been using to register their businesses offshore, and we've seen it appear in the offshore leaks, Panama Papers dumps. Additionally, you see the Seychelles address over there. That's also an address used by a lot of companies that are trying to evade taxes and law enforcement. And we suspect Ideal Solutions is also operated by Alex, but it's not a fact. What you also see is that Ferasco is a leaf ASN, but it's in fact a part of a chain of leafs, because Lyric First and Comtech has been registered almost at the same time to provide some sort of a shield between Ferasco and the Retin, which is a Ukrainian-known data center and colocation provider.
So the question is, how do you do this? You know, from an actor-centric point of view, how can you really map out the whole underground marketplace? And that's what we're doing. And it takes some unique skills. You know, I have a human intelligence background, but I'm fairly technical as well. But what we're doing ultimately is targeting the human element. You know, people say the human is the weakest link on the defender side. You know, that's why phishing still works. It's the same on the offender side, so we're kind of exploiting that, right? We're getting into the underground market, we're building up reputations and personas, and then we're just targeting the actors that are the key actors, right? There's thousands and thousands of actors, but you have to be able to assess, spot and assess, and target. You know, it's all about understanding that business model, right? So it's trying to get away from a perpetual state of reactiveness and saying, hey, if I understand the business model, if I understand how the key enablers work, is there little things that I can do to disrupt it? And we've seen that work where you do disruption and you see the chaos in the marketplace when clients start to complain, when, you know, the other Bulletproof hosters or the other service providers start to circle like sharks and so on and so forth. Last, you know, the skill set required, you know, we're targeting Russian language cyber criminals. We're targeting Spanish language cyber criminals. You know, you can do it from the United States. You know, if your school taught Russian, and you know that can only get you so far. It's usually sniffed out pretty good. But if you want long-term, protracted, elevated access to these guys, you know, you have to have a local perspective, culture understanding, ability to kind of engage in the native language, and that's why all of our teams, you know, at Intel 471, what we do is we have boots on the ground model for this stuff. And then, you know, you have to have the technical and non-technical knowledge. It's about knowing how money laundering, you know, that whole business model, how does money laundering work? How does credit card fraud work? How does malware work? You know, you have to kind of be able to talk the talk. And last but not least, you know, intelligence collection or just intelligence in general is it's inherently hard to scale. That's why governments do it. You know, it's expensive, but you have to have time, money, and commitment and effort to do it.
So now we saw the experience about these crime or contents from the Bulletproof hosting perspective. Now let's talk about the consumer side. In fact, back to our immersive experience, this ProCard CC forum, in fact, what's happening is that you have a lot of banners on the website. They might lead you to some other crime or forums, some dump shops. Maybe you can click on some links and get some anonymization services like VPN, SOCKS, SSH, etc. You might want to use the Jabber server of the site to communicate in private, and maybe you want to also check some exchange services to monetize your operations. What's happening is that we propose to focus on the consumer side to glean intelligence and learn a lot more about this crime war ecosystem, and hence the paradigm shift, because we're not looking at passive DNS like most of people do. We're looking at the consumer side because that's where you get like the most interesting parts. In fact, what we see at Cisco Umbrella is a lot of IPs that are representing the consumers. And they're not all created equal. You have the consumer IPs, querying domains that are hosted on hosting IPs. In fact, the numbers are quite big, like 60+ million consumer IPs, and then about 20 million hosting IPs on any given day. And this plays to your advantage because these IPs are not all created equal. In fact, we differentiate between two classes. So you have the consumer IPs and the hosting IPs. Within the consumer space, you differentiate victims who are, let's say, talking to malware C2s and ransomware payment sites. And then you also have actors or wannabe crimeware consumers that go to these cybercrime sites. And then on the hosting side, we're talking also about victims, for example, hacked routers that are part of a fast-flex proxy network. But then, most importantly, as it was discussed with BPH, the actors will be hosting or operating these hosting infrastructures for other criminal customers. And then I guess what we're proposing here is to focus on the consumer side, because that's where you learn a lot more interesting things. How is this happening? In fact, the goal, as we said, is a recommendation engine. And the idea is that using both actor-centric intelligence and network-centric intelligence, now you can get some IPs and domains as seeds, and then you can pivot from client IPs or consumer IPs to domains, and from domains to consumer IPs, as opposed to hosting IP to domain and domain to hosting IP, which is your typical passive DNS that everybody else is doing.
So how do you take this kind of consumer-based browsing to a scalable model? That's what I'll be discussing. So we propose a client-based internet graph where we pair off cybercrime users with items. These items are the domains that they're actually surfing. Now, to help put this in context is to think about this graph in contrast to another. Now, say we go back to ProCardCC, a domain that's hosted by Alex, and we actually scrape this homepage. And we can construct a hyperlink graph as the one that you see here. Now, this is a typical graph that you may be familiar with, especially if you're in the business of scraping or crawling the web. But what we're proposing is a very different graph. In fact, it's a graph that's much more familiar to you or similar to something if you're at Netflix. For example, we want to pair users with movies and then recommend movies. Or if you're at Amazon, you may want to pair users with products and then recommend products. So what we have here is maybe one client who's surfing, let's say, some cybercrime forums. And maybe not just one, but maybe a few, or maybe clicking through this one forum deeper and deeper. And maybe at one point in this forum, they click through to something else, maybe a carding-related domain, and then we can kind of unravel this to even more topics within cybercrime. For example, we may at some point click through to something like a proxy domain, or maybe find something completely unrelated, which we wouldn't have been able to click through, and that's maybe these actors actually communicating to each other through Jabber. So now given this abstract model, what we need to do is be able to search through it. So we're going to propose something like client-based or seed-based searching. Now, if you take this graph, what's really great about it is that you have things paired off. For example, you might want to just pair off through a client and then shift to a domain, and then back to a client, and back to a domain. And if you were to unravel that, actually, then you get this tree-based structure you get here. And in that way, that's a lot easier structure to actually think about and actually search at scale. So now given this abstract model and a way to potentially search it, what we need to define is something like a stopping criteria, like when is deep enough? So if we go back to ProCardCC, this website that might be hosted by a Bulletproof hoster, let's say Alex, let's say all we need to do is just think about what is the degree at this vertex. For example, how many clients are interested in this website in a given interval of time? Potentially it's in some region that we think is interesting, and we may pivot from it. Now from the clients, we find one client that's finding itself looking at a bunch of or a variety of domains that are within some region or bound where we might be able to think that this is related to cybercrime. So let's say we pivot through this and we end up at maybe another domain, let's say mastercvv.ru. Here's another domain, ironically, that is hosted by Alex. And again, we can kind of continue this recipe on. And again, we're just asking the simple question, what is the degree at this vertex? So in a way, from that simple criteria, we have a consumer type of browsing stopping criteria. For example, if I were to stop at a domain, all I'm asking is how popular is it? Or if I were to stop at a client vertex, then all I need to ask the question is, how chatty is this client? Potentially if they're within some region that maybe makes me suspicious, then maybe I can stop and continue to traverse through here. Now, what's great about this is that these are pretty simple and expressive metrics. And what's great is that they're very simple to describe to someone. But there's some other metrics that we also compute. For example, how often does a client repeat themselves from 1 hour to the next? Or how much does a domain, let's say Jabber, for example, have clients repeatedly coming to it? It's probably something that you might think about like as you're surfing the web yourself. So now given this model, this way to search it and how to stop, what we need to do is build it. So the way we've done this is using Hadoop-based technologies. We take about 1 terabyte of our DNS raw logs and we just project this stuff down into client domain pairs. Now this can kind of vary, but in the wheelhouse we get down to about tens of gigabytes of data. Now, at this phase, we'll just aggregate various properties of this graph up, and then we'll result in about a graph of about hundreds of millions of vertices. Now, to make all of this work and be fluid, we need to be able to store this stuff. So we'll store this in another Hadoop-based technology known as an Apache HBase, which is a key value store, which allows us to simply look up things pretty quickly. So what's the novelty here? It's a scaled graph, and we've embedded the stopping criteria. And the way that we've done that is by basing this off of some projections or embedded some values that are not in tables that need to be joined and a variety of things that have to be done as you're traversing the graph. But actually in that process of traversing the graph, you actually have metrics and pre-computed aggregated values. And the way we've done this is using Apache HBase. You can embed this stuff in row keys and column families in clever ways. Now, that's great all at one time, right? But what we can also do is over time, from hour to hour, pre-compute these things, roll them up, put them in HBase, and what you've done is you've constructed a signal. Hence the name Amplifying Signals from the Underground.
All right, so after David described like the back end and the architecture, now you might ask, how does this work in practice? So a quick demo on how this works. So as we glean this actor-centric intelligence, like some domains and IPs that we know for sure are clean signals from the BPH space, we take procard.cc again. That's hosted by Alex, and then we navigate the graph by setting thresholds on our chattiness and popularity stopping criteria. In this case, we start with procard.cc, and we pivot through the consumer IPs by setting the chattiness to a max of 10, meaning I'm not interested in IPs that are talking to more than 10 unique domains. And then from those IPs, I'm going to pivot to other domains that I also keep at a popularity of under 10. In this case, you're trying to keep yourself within a narrow band where people are very interested in a specific theme or topic. And then from those 20 plus domains, you keep like the navigation, and you only take consumer IPs with a chattiness, again, under 10, and then you expand to 400 plus domains, all related within the crimeware or cybercrime ecosystem experience. You can see here the amplification factor from 1 to 20 plus to 400. It's pretty amazing. And what you also see is that everything here stayed within the crimeware ecosystem experience, typically your carding, crimeware, VPN, proxy, and SOCs, which maintain your privacy and anonymity. So it's a fundamental service that criminals will be using. And then finally, you might find like some exchange services also within those domains you explored. So I guess the takeaways from this presentation, some of them, is that, as we said, if we want to make an impact on these cyber criminals, we have to have a proactive, unified approach, mixing the actor-centric perspective and the network-centric perspective. That way you have this advance on the bad guys, and you know what they are planning ahead of them. The other thing is that by combining these two views, we're able now to build this recommendation engine that relies on a couple new paradigms. The first one is that we focus on the consumer side pivoting, and then the other one is that we treat IPs as polymorphic entities. Namely, they can either be consumer IPs or hosting IPs. The hosting IPs approach is the passive DNS, and the consumer IP perspective is typically your Netflix or Amazon recommendation approach. So that was it. Thanks again for your attention, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. The question, if I heard it right, how do you access the ASN information? Well, most of the ASN information is, as you know, is open source. You can get it from BGP route views, sorry. If you have like a large network that is worldwide, you can get that information with your peering relationships. If I understand right, you're talking about the information about the ASNs, or how do you know the ASNs of the actor? How do you know the ASNs? Yeah, that's like a public information. You can collect all of the data, and then you can basically store it and... Say that again, I'm sorry? No, it's not. Like the WHOIS information is public. So by checking that out, you can see at least what the person who registered the ASN has put in the public database of ASNs. Yeah, so he might put like some garbage information. True, but then I believe there are like some, I would say, standards where you have to put some, like some meaningful info and not like some bogus stuff. So I guess that's also the responsibility of the regional internet registries. So RIPE, ARIN, APNIC, LACNIC, AFRINIC might have like different rules, so some of them might be stricter than others. I know RIPE is a lot stricter around privacy, And Aaron is a little bit more laxer, but then other entities might have different rules. That's based on a subpoena, and we can talk about it offline. Do we share client IPs? That's, yeah, we're very strict and strong about privacy, so only in very specific cases that we do that.
So bulletproof hosting is very important to the sell side. The Russian parliament banned proxies and VPNs, I think, maybe 6 days ago. That's important for the consumption side. Do you have any comments about what might happen here?
I mean, that's a good question, but I don't think it's going to affect anything in the underground. I mean, they're already, everything about what they're doing is already illegal, and like all the jurisdictions just about that they're operating in, or, you know, it's questionable activity. So I think it's just going to continue, no impact.
So you don't expect any change in consumption patterns?
I don't.
Thank you.
I was wondering, like, it seems like if they're hiding in these geographic, like, gray areas, sort of, like, to what extent is this more of like a political problem? Like, if we lived in a better world where there weren't, like, you know, corrupt or, you know, broken up countries, like, then what would they do? Would that, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, that was a question that someone asked to Mr. Grasso yesterday at the Avalanche Takedown talk, and he said he doesn't want to get into political discussions, but yeah, if we were in an ideal world, you'd have like extradition treaties that just work fine, and then law enforcement will be collaborating like perfectly, but we don't have that.
Well, so do you think there would be no cybercrime, or like?
No. But what's interesting is, like, it's the infrastructure that's in the gray areas. You know, maybe I didn't make it clear, but it's the individuals are actually in, you know, they're in gray areas as well, but they're, you know, they're in Ukraine proper, not in the eastern, you know, part, Kiev, Odessa, stuff like that as well. So they're there, they're known. We've mapped out the entire space, we think, for the most part, at least the top tier guys, but they're just free to operate.
One last thought. I mean, this is one approach to tackle cybercrime. Another one that we wish happened, it happened like a few times, which is depeering on a very systematic way. Like McCullough back in the day, when they shut them off, that should happen like on a daily or weekly basis for some of these, you know, crooks. So,
Thanks.
thank you, guys.
I imagine you're keeping this closely held. I mean, this, you know, your system for tracking the stuff. What's the object? What are you hoping to accomplish after you've mapped out, you know, Alex and Alex's friends and his rivals? Then what?
Good point. So what? Yeah, I was actually asking Jason yesterday, so what? Do we know all of this and maybe a lot of it? Well, the idea is that there are like multiple angles to answer this question. Some of it is shared with the community, so we raise awareness. I know we operate mostly at the tactical and technical level, but then you have a lot of laws that have to change. So then, for example, the peering relationships, the hosting providers kind of regulations, those should happen at I would say, the regulators level. So in a sense, we can always like catch these IPs and domains and whatnot, but then eventually we have to have laws changing so we can basically make it harder for criminals to register ASNs or buy IP space if they don't have, let's say, the right credentials, or if they're using like stolen credit cards to pay for that stuff. So yeah, some of it is like sharing with the community, so we raise awareness. Some of it is working with law enforcement when necessary. Some of it is, I guess, since we're working with commercial companies, I guess it's protecting our customers. So you can kind of approach the problem from different angles here, and hopefully all of them combined can kind of help us move forward with this cybercrime problem. Does that kind of answer your question? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. A lot of the marketplaces, they have a mirror, but Alphabet, just disappeared basically with Hansa. So the more top tier stuff bounces around these bulletproof hosted networks. The top tier marketplaces, they're just clients of the service providers, the bulletproof hosting providers, and they bounce around to physical location, plus they have proxy network in front. So it's pretty resilient.
Yeah, even with non-Tor access, you can still have a pretty good view into what's happening. I mean, Tor is great, like the dark web and whatnot, but it's tedious to some of the wannabes. So, and there are like professional clients of these BPH actors, but then you might have like some mid-tier and low-tier consumers who really don't care about using Tor, so they want to have like a clear website to just go and buy stuff,
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is like on the Russian language side, we've never seen a mass movement towards Tor.
I had a quick question about so some of this data that you used is in-house to your company, meshed with some crawling data from open source. Do you have any plans to have like an open interface where you can query the system that you mentioned to kind of get a reputation or some type of feedback?
Yeah, as far as Cisco Umbrella / OpenDNS is concerned, we have a product that offers that. We're sharing here I would say the science and engineering behind it. If you want to talk about how to access this, I guess I can point you to our sales. But I guess we also have a lot of cooperation with research, like academic entities or organizations like universities and research labs. So we can have a discussion offline, and I'm sure we can find a good way to collaborate and help you out.
Yeah, can you tell me how has this research and this information affected you personally? And has it impacted your life in a negative or positive way?
You mean like actors coming after us?
Yeah, like you're looking over your shoulder,
So far, so good. Maybe after this, we'll get shot at. Jason can talk, maybe.
No, I mean, we think, for us, we're doing the actor-centric stuff. Like, we talk about that a lot. Even from a business perspective, there's risk to that. But personal safety is obviously paramount. And I defer to our guys on the ground, right? So we've got guys in Colombia, Brazil, Ukraine, Romania, and Israel, and they're experts in this stuff. Our guys in Ukraine have been doing it a very long time, so I defer to them. We game it out, and I'm an Intel guy. That's my background, so it's a challenge when I see this stuff. Where I was previously, I was the marketing guy's biggest enemy because I never had to deal with the blogs and stuff like that. We're a little more open on it when we can be, but it's pretty thought out.
Okay, one last thought. In fact, last year we had a talk about also bulletproof hosting, and we exposed a lot of them. But then after a month, I believe that the talk was released on YouTube. There's an entire infrastructure we released, or we discussed in the talk, that has been shut down completely. So I guess we're having an impact, in a sense, since they just wanted to go underground and not ever use those ASNs in IP space after we discussed them.
Yeah, and I think Cerber, the guy behind Cerber affiliate program, he just announced too that he's closing the affiliate program. So I think there was a talk yesterday from one of the guys from Google or something that highlighted some of the stuff on Cerber, and he just announced to the marketplace that he's closing at least membership right now. So there is impact, there is effect to some of this stuff. Personal safety, though, we're not really concerned. We didn't release anything that would affect us.
Any more questions? If not, then we'll be on the side. You can ask us questions. I think they want us to go off stage, so thank you again. Appreciate it.